Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back. We're back with the Truth Attack. Okay, so we are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the broadcast network operating. So we sure would appreciate it if you're not already there at the website listening online through the online radio link. We sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to libertyworksradionetwork.com and get signed up as a monthly subscribing member. And if you want to get fully informed on my favorite topic on this show, every Thursday evening at 6 on this network, which of course is the maladministration of the federal income tax by the IRS, the DOJ, and the lower federal courts for the last 50, 60, 75 years, actually since World War II. Find your way over to taxfreedom.com and start reading. And if you know anyone that needs help answering IRS correspondence or answering the DOJ in court, send them over to irszoom.com, where they can get assistance with the IRS and the DOJ. Based on the Supreme Court's most recent ruling on the income tax a year ago, which says essentially everything the federal government has been doing since World War II is unconstitutional, because the income tax is not a direct tax without limitation under the 16th Amendment. It's part of the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 taxing powers of the impost, duty, and excise. No such thing as a direct tax. That's been a lie. And of course it's a lie, like I've been telling people for 35 years. It's the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, a heavy, progressive, graduated income tax. That's where you get graduated taxation of income, the Communist Manifesto. And that's what the judges have been enforcing on the American people for 60 years. So we're going to talk a bit about that tonight, because for the last couple of weeks I've been talking too much about current events and not enough about what's happening with the income tax law, which has to be going away, either because the juries are going to send it away or because the Supreme Court is going to reaffirm the decisions it's already taken, and they're going to use them in a domestic tax case. They have no choice. They can't walk back what they've done. They've made the rulings that end the system. The writing's on the wall. The rest of you just need to wake up and see it and read it. Okay, what are we going to start with tonight? Well, of course, the news is all about affordability. And last night, Trump did a 20-minute speech to try and address that for the American people, because, of course, Joe Biden and the Democrats created such a rampant and bad wave of inflation that it drove prices up nearly 25% across the board. And even though inflation had subsided before he left office, of course, once inflation hits prices, it doesn't come back. So the Democrats, who did not say a word about price increases and affordability, while Joe Biden drove everything through the roof based on his insane energy policies that tried to shut down carbon and natural gas and push everyone to electricity, which of course you don't have the grid to do. And without cheap carbon, energy becomes expensive, and that cascades into the price of every single product on every single shelf in every single store in every single city in every single state in the country. So Biden's inflation was caused by his energy policies, and I told you at the time that was what was happening. And Trump last night was trying to focus on how he has laid the framework for a true economic recovery next year. And, of course, how he's beaten back all of Biden's terrible economic numbers in less than 1 year, which is actually phenomenal, because while you can drive prices up extremely quickly, it's incredibly hard to bring them back down. So we got numbers yesterday that look real good. Inflation was at 2.7%, Oil is at $56 a barrel. Gas is below $3 a gallon in like 42 states. Natural gas is coming down. Electricity rates have fallen. The interest rate is at 3.75%, which is, still not low enough, but coming down. It's better than the 4% it's been stuck at for a while. The CPI was 2.1%, consumer price index. That's the inflation rate for 1 month, last month, 2.1%. The core CPI was 1.69%. So those inflation numbers are right in line with where they were when Donald Trump left office. They were at 1.8% when Joe Biden took over, and he drove it to 9% within 2 years. So the numbers are back in place for a strong economy. And hopefully, this foundation that's been laid will start to provide returns next year. Of course, Trump has also brought some, well, he says 18 trillion, but it's probably more like 9 to 12 trillion in promised investment in America by Asia, the Middle East, and the major microchip companies and others to bring production back to America so that we can escape being dependent upon China for things like pharmaceutical drugs, microchips, and etc. So they want to produce at home, not be dependent upon foreign production that's done under slave labor and has a competitive advantage, which of course is why Trump has put the tariffs in place to force countries to the table to negotiate a level trade playing field so that America will have access to sell this expanded production that we're laying the groundwork for into foreign markets that will no longer be able to lock us out unless they want to pay tariffs to sell here in America. But because those trade settlements will primarily be based on both sides eliminating tariffs, you can't claim or depend on using tariffs to replace the income tax. And the income tax has to go away because it's not constitutional. It's been exposed as such, and I'm going to talk about how it's been operated wrongfully and why that is all easy to see as being unconstitutional. So, like I said, the income tax is going away. Tariffs aren't going to produce it. I think you need to switch from taxing corporate profits, which they account away. So the burden of the tax system is shifted to the backs of labor because the corporations, through accounting, somehow magically don't have profits to pay tax on at the end of the year. So you can't tax profits because it just encourages the company to lie and to do business in a manner that eliminates profits, which of course eliminates the Main Street desire to invest in Wall Street firms that are just playing accounting games and you don't know if it's a shell game or if it's honest business because it's all fraudulent accounting. So you're losing the connection between Wall Street and Main Street. Main Street has lost access to capital through the high interest rates. And of course, all the capital they pushed out during COVID ended up in the hands of the institutions. Right now, there's some $8 trillion sitting on the side in the money market accounts in the stock market. And why is it there? It doesn't know what to do. It can't go to bonds at 3.75 or 4%. That's not a good return. Its stock market looks like an all-time high. You want to put your money in at the top of the market. But every time the market falls 1,000 points, it's perceived as a buying opportunity for some of that cash sitting on the sideline. So, it kind of looks like we've reached a new equilibrium and in the market prices where any drop creates an opportunity for sideline cash to step in and buy. And if the economy takes off next year with all of this potential investment, low inflation, low energy costs, tax rebates coming, because they were extended in the great big beautiful bill, they put the tax cuts in place for this year. So people should get better numbers on the tax return. But as I've said before, just like you know, making it more affordable or trying to make it more affordable to buy a car. That doesn't help everyone. That doesn't really help the labor class. It only helps people buying a car. And giving people a rebate on their tax return, well, that will help a lot of people, but it's a one time a year. Giving money back in April that you never should have stolen doesn't make it any easier to get by month to month for the 15 months you're waiting for the money to come back. And when it comes back, all you can do is use it to pay off what you shouldn't have fallen behind on because the money shouldn't have been taken from you in the first place. So a one-time payment once a year doesn't really address affordability. And what you really need to do, of course, is to fix the problem since the income tax is ending, because it's unconstitutional as a direct tax on your labor, wages, salaries, and all your other sources of earnings, which we're going to get to talking about in a bit. Well, since the income tax is ending, we should stop withholding it from the paychecks of the American people. And that will provide meaningful relief and affordability for the entire labor class in America, who were all subjected to some level of withholding of tax from their pay at work. Let everybody take home 96% of their paycheck. It's 6% for Social Security goes out. Give them the rest of it. That's how you provide real affordability, is you let people take home their whole paycheck instead of stealing 30% of it and then sending back 20% 15 months later. It's not only a finance mechanism that shifts the power from the pocket of the citizen to the coffers of the government and the banks and the institutions. It steals your economic power. It steals your political power by preventing you from being able to support the things you want to support instead of being forced to pay what the government is jamming down your throat with whatever insane, stupid, nonsensical policy they're adopting this week. So, Trump has laid the groundwork for a strong recovery next year. With some $8 trillion, that's going to be jobs, investment, new work, new development, new construction. It's going to happen all over the country. And that's what you need. And that kind of economic expansion can't be done unless energy prices are low. And like I said, Trump has set the stage for that. Gas is below $3 a gallon. Diesel is down. Natural gas is down. Oil is at $56 a barrel. When Biden left office, it was at 80 or 78. Dropping it to 56 in 11 months is just, it couldn't have been done by anyone else other than Trump. And it absolutely had to be done. I'm convinced if Harris had won the presidency, we'd be in a recession headed for a depression. Nobody could afford the energy prices they were jamming. The whole program was designed not to help the American people, but to make them completely dependent upon the government, which is what happens when energy is unaffordable. So, the stage is set for a pretty strong recovery. Like I said, the core inflation is back down below 2%, 1.6%. And affordability is set, but half the country, of course, Democrats, don't want to believe anything and won't report the truth about the economic reality. They just want the lie pushed that the tariffs have increased prices, and that's a lie. Prices have come down during Donald Trump. They just haven't come all the way back to where they were before Joe Biden and the Democrats blew them up. Okay, I think I hear the first commercial break coming up. This is Thomas Freed on the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com. Get signed up as a subscribing member. I'll be back in 5 minutes to talk more about how the income tax laws are going to have to change in the courts. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right into this. So, how did we go from being a free people whose labors were not taxed before the 16th Amendment in 1913 to this, what has evolved into, communistic monster of a tax system that is based on the second plank of the Communist Manifesto and not the Constitution, and which is being used to steal the American people's revenues and productivity and profits in a system of theft and control by intimidation, extortion, and false imprisonment, based on an allegedly new power to tax directly and without limitation all persons and all sources of earnings, allegedly redefined in law as gross income, of course. Now, what's wrong with all of this nonsense? Well, let's go through this quickly, shall we? The Constitution authorizes two basic forms of taxation: direct taxes and indirect taxes. The key to a direct tax, which is usually imposed on a person or property, is that it is unavoidable. The Constitution provides that all direct taxes must be apportioned to the several states for payment. So if the federal government wants to raise $1 billion by a direct tax, and the last census showed California had 10% of the population, the apportionment requirements of the Constitution that apply to direct taxes would then mean that the state of California would be responsible for 10% of the direct tax. So the state of California would get a bill for $100 million, 10% of the $1 billion being raised by the direct tax. And the federal government is prohibited from appearing on the doorstep of any American citizen to demand the payment of a direct tax. Prohibited. Direct taxes must be presented in proportion to the census to the state legislatures for payment by the state government, which can then pay the direct tax by any means within its allowed authorities under the state constitution. It can pay it out of the treasury, it can erect a toll, it can erect a one-time tax, it can put in place a sales tax, any mechanism available to the state to raise the money. It can do it on a bond. Any method available to the state to raise money can be utilized by the state to pay the direct tax, and citizens are not involved, other than being taxed by the state, possibly, in whatever mechanism the state used to pay the direct tax. So direct taxes must be apportioned to the several states in proportion to the census. This is one of the elements of the Constitution that the Supreme Court reaffirmed in the Moore et Ux decision a year ago. The other form of taxation allowed is the indirect form. And indirect taxes have to be uniform in their application, and they're authorized as impost, duty, and excise. Impost taxes foreign persons in America, foreign imports, and in certain foreign places where the American government is the territorial authority, like U.S. possessions, and in foreign countries under a tax treaty where the government isn't the territorial authority, but it is given legislative authority to tax its own citizens in the foreign country under a treaty. And this is important because that's where Section 61 actually came from, which we're going to look at in a moment. So you have direct and indirect taxes, and before the 16th Amendment, there was absolutely no direct taxation of the American people. Now, after the 16th Amendment, the federal government passed the first income tax as a tariff act, and that was upheld by the Supreme Court. And the 16th Amendment says that Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on income from whatever source derived, without apportionment, without regard to any census or enumeration. So while the Supreme Court held that the income tax enacted was constitutional, It also held that there were no new powers created by the 16th Amendment. So from 1913 to 1942, the income tax was upheld as an indirect tariff taxing foreign persons in America. And this is all recorded in the 1939 statutes. It was not paid by Americans unless they earned money from the possessions or territories in a foreign country under tax treaty, which we entered into a tax treaty with Canada in 1918. And part of that tax treaty was Section 22A, gross income. So in 1954, when the law was recodified from the 1939 statutes into the titles of the code, Section 22A was moved from 22A to Section 61. But the connection to the original legislation of a Canadian tax treaty and not the original income tax legislation of 1913, that connection was lost. So right after recodification in 1954, the Supreme Court in Commissioner v. Glenshaw Glass held ruling that Section 61 was Congress acting on authority to tax all accessions to wealth. Well, wait a minute, what happened to the limitation in Section 61 of only being tax treaty authority? Oh, the Supreme Court lost track of that. And they decided to implement, after World War II in 1955, a direct tax under the 16th Amendment, allegedly, based on taxing gross income, all accessions to wealth. So they removed the income tax from the category of indirect taxation to which it inherently belonged, had always been a part of, and had been approved by the Supreme Court as an indirect tax on foreigners, not on citizens. It's an indirect tax collected from foreigners. It was a tariff act, the Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act of October 3rd, 1913. A tariff is an impost. Imposts tax foreigners, not domestic citizens. If you investigate, you find that what the Tariff Act did, the original legislation, is it required everyone doing business with foreigners, non-resident aliens, and foreign corporations to deduct money as tax from payments made to those foreign persons. It's not a direct tax on citizens, it's an indirect tax that is collected from the federally taxable activities of foreign persons in the 50 states. It reaches into the 50 states. Now, what role does that put the citizens in? Well, believe it or not, you have the role of the sovereign. You're the tax collector. You're the withholding agent, one form of them. You have a duty when you do business with foreigners to withhold money as tax from payments made. If you don't want to be a taxpayer, don't do business with foreign persons. You won't have to collect any money, and you won't be liable for what you collected by withholding, which is how the system works. There's no direct liability because you worked or earned money. That's not what Section 1 says. It imposes a rate of tax on taxable income. The taxable income is collected at the source by those with a duty to withhold money as tax from certain payments, i.e. those made to foreign persons. And then the collector is made liable, not for tax on his own income, but for the payment of the tax that he has collected from all of the other persons who are all foreign. And the collector has to send the tax in, and there is no direct liability in the name of the wage earner, not even in the name of the non-resident alien. The statutes in the original legislation were so pure in their indirect implementation that there was no provision for the non-resident alien to be liable for payment of the tax if it wasn't collected by a withholding agent. And the Treasury, upon realizing that, issued Treasury Decision 2313, which is what the government used to make non-resident aliens liable for the payment of tax when it wasn't properly collected by payors. because there was no other way to do it. What happens if somebody did business with a foreigner, paid the money, and didn't withhold any tax? You couldn't go get it from the withholding agent because he didn't collect it. He's only liable for what he collected. You can go and admonish him and possibly fine him for not administering properly to the duty to collect tax from transactions with foreign persons, but you couldn't get the tax. You had to go to the illegal, the non-resident alien to get the tax. So how are you going to do that? Oh, Treasury Decision 2013. There's the liability for the tax. So what they've done is pervert this system since 1955 in Glenshaw Glass into being a direct tax under the 16th Amendment on all sources of gross income. Well, I guess we should finish up with explaining the three powers to tax, indirect powers to tax, right? We said impost is the power to tax foreign persons and in foreign places. Duties is the power to tax exported goods. We don't have duties in this country. That's why we have duty-free shops at the international airport. It's the only kind of restrictions we have that could be interpreted as duties are on trade with nations like North Korea, Iran. So duties tax foreign exports, which we don't have, and excises tax the manufacture, consumption, and sale of commodities within the country, things like alcohol, tobacco, firearms. Excises are taxes on licenses to pursue certain occupations, like selling alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And excises are taxes on the corporate privilege, where it is the privilege that is the subject of the tax, not the mere earning of money. So imposts and duties on foreigners' imports and exports clearly cannot be the indirect basis for the tax on citizens, can it? And excises only tax commodities, licenses, and corporations. So you see, there's no indirect basis to tax the American citizen. And when the income tax is held to be an indirect tax up until World War II, there's no taxation of the American people or their labor, and the tax was not administered in that manner. It's not until 1942 in the victory tax that the American people and their labors all became subject to federal taxation for the first time. And the victory tax was a 2-year temporary war revenue measure that could not be enacted for a period longer than 2 years, and which, when it expired at the end of 1944, couldn't be reenacted because the war was about to end in 1945. So I suspect that Congress thought when they enacted the victory tax that somebody would bitch and that they would lose, but it wouldn't matter because it would come after 1944 when the tax had already expired. So they went through 2 years of World War II, 42 through 44, 43 and 44, and nobody complained. The victory tax expired and nobody had complained. So the government reenacted new legislation that didn't impose any tax. The new legislation in 1945 didn't impose any new income tax like the victory tax had been imposed in 42. It just created, sustained, and kept in place the system of withholding by the employer, but it was now not based on any taxation of the American people that was imposed by law, but based on their habitual acceptance of it already being withheld for 2 years during World War II. The new system is now based on you asking your employer to withhold the tax when there is no tax imposed on your labor or wages. And the mechanism used to ask your employer to withhold tax from you is the W-4. Without the W-4, they can't steal your money. Okay, I think I hear the second commercial break coming up. We're going to continue with this transformation of the system from communist to communistic monster to the communistic monster. We'll be back in 5 minutes. This is Thomas Freed. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right back into this. When the commercial break came up, I was explaining that previous to World War II, the income tax was enforced as an indirect tax that did not reach the labors or earnings of the American people in the 50 states that were earned by right. It was a tax collected from foreign persons subject to the Tariff Act, enacted as an impost, which is the authority to tax foreign activity, foreign persons, foreign imports, and in certain foreign places where the government has the authority to tax. In 1942, they start taxing the American people directly and without limitation based on the victory tax, which was probably unconstitutional, but it wasn't challenged, so they got away with it. After World War II, with the American people conditioned to accept a direct tax on their labor, the government has started using the 1955 decision of Glenshaw Glass to tax everything the American people did directly and without limitation under alleged authority of the 16th Amendment to tax directly and without limitation, as authorized under Section 61, gross income, Congress taxing all accessions to wealth. So let's look at Section 61. Gross income defined. A, general definition. Except as otherwise provided in this subtitle, gross income means all income from whatever source derived, including, but not limited to, the following items. 1. Compensation for services, including fees, commissions, fringe benefits, and similar items. Wages and salaries aren't there. How are they taxable? Well, we'll talk about that, won't we? 2. Gross income derived from business. 3. Gains derived from dealings in property. 4. Interest. 5. Rent. 6. Royalties. 7. Dividends. 8. Alimony and separate maintenance payments. 9. Annuities. 10. Income from life insurance and endowment contracts. 11. Pensions. 12. Income from discharge of indebtedness. 13. Distributive share of partnership gross income. 14. Income in respect of a decedent. And 15, income from an interest in an estate or trust. Now, I'm sorry, but how would any of these sources be subject to indirect taxation by impost, duty, and excise? Oh, that's right. Only if they were enacted under a Canadian tax treaty or a tax treaty with a foreign nation, like Canada or in Europe, which is where this code section applies. It was never enacted as domestic legislation. All of these sources were only deemed taxable before 1955 in Glenshaw Glass if they were earned by a citizen in Canada or a U.S. possession. These were not taxable sources to citizens in the 50 states. Where would the government, federal government, get jurisdiction to tax rent? You rent a room in your house to your brother-in-law. You both live in the same state. You're both citizens. Where would the government have authority to tax the rent? That's not an impost on foreign activity. It's not a duty on exported goods. It's not an excise on the manufacture, consumption, and sale of commodity. It's not on a license. It's not on a corporate activity. Where's the authority to tax rent? Indirectly, by impost, duty, or excise. It doesn't exist. You don't owe any tax on your rent because it's not a direct tax. That's what the Supreme Court said in Murad X 1 year ago. Income taxes are indirect taxes. And direct taxes, all direct taxes, have to be apportioned to the several states for payment. These are the provisions, the clauses of the Constitution that the Supreme Court reaffirmed after 70 years of allowing the lower courts to violate them, to implement their communistic, graduated socialism. The income tax. That's communism. It's repugnant to the Constitution. There's no graduated taxation of the American people that's allowed. It has to be uniform. There's no taxation of interest. What would be the basis for taxing interest? The federal government's not got no claim to interest you earn on a banknote in a state or from a loan. They have no claim to royalties, dividends. They can tax the dividend at the corporate level. They can tax the corporation on paying dividends. They can't tax you for receiving it. That's not an imposed duty, and you're not a corporation. How about pensions? Where would they get jurisdiction over pensions? Or indebtedness, income from discharge of indebtedness. None of these sources of alleged taxable gross income are actually taxable to the federal government indirectly under the most recent holding of the Supreme Court. They're only usable as the basis for a direct tax on everything you do, which is not authorized in the Constitution because the income tax is not a direct tax, and if it were, it would have to be apportioned to the several states. It's an indirect tax, and the 16th Amendment created no new powers. So what is income? If it's not a new power, it's not an impost, it's not a duty, it's not an excise, it's not a direct tax, what the hell is it? Income is the yardstick. It's the mechanism by which the amount of tax owed is measured. But first, in order to have something to measure, you need to have an impost, a duty, or an excise tax that applies to earnings derived from certain federally taxable activities and transactions where the income is the measure of the tax, the profit derived from the taxable activities. But if there's no impost, duty, or excise, there's nothing to measure. And you don't just directly tax everything that was earned by the citizen, which is the fraudulent implementation that is bankrupting this country, driving the $38 trillion debt higher and higher and higher. And none of the money is actually taxed. It all goes around the Treasury to the Federal Reserve Bank. It's peonage debt service. We don't have a tax system because the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto don't provide for a representative government. They provide a system of ruling. And that's what the income tax has been used to do, to rule the American people and control them. It's not funding the operations of the federal government. That's the fraud. Together with the claim that the 16th Amendment authorized a new power to tax directly and without limitation everything you do, and turn us into a communistic, socialist, oppressed, ruled, enslaved people. Wages and salaries aren't here in Section 61. Compensation is here. So you know how wages and salaries get taxed? Judicial legislation. Some judge looked at this and said, oh, well, wages and salaries, that's compensation for services. So now you're all slaves because we can tax you directly. You want to know where wages and salaries are taxed in the United States Code? Section 1441B, when earned by a non-resident alien. In that code section, all three terms are present: compensation, wages, and salaries. It's only the labor of the foreign person that was taxed in 1913 by the Tariff Act, and it's only the labor of the foreign person that is still taxed in the code today. 1441 says wages and salaries, 1441B says wages and salaries of non-resident aliens are subject to the collection of the tax. Nowhere are the terms in the law with respect to citizens. It's all been made up by a corrupt and crooked socialist federal judiciary using judicial legislation to not only rewrite the statutes, but to rewrite and eliminate the protections of the Constitution. Eliminate the Constitution entirely with respect to federal taxation and replace it with the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. Oh yeah, and the fifth plank. That's the Federal Reserve Bank. Yeah, none of it is constitutional. None of it. And until you address this and fix it, you will be ruled and oppressed, and you will not be free. So taking back the paycheck is the critical step in restoring freedom and in taking the first step towards restoring a representative government as well. Because the government in place right now behaves like a ruler, a dictator, a king. It thinks it has unlimited authority to steal from you whatever it wants or whatever it needs. And you can bet with 38 trillion going up 2 trillion every year, it won't be long before they need more and more and more until there's nothing left to take. You don't believe me? Take a look at Cuba, China, Russia, everywhere where they've tried socialism. Soon to be on display in New York City, it would appear. Will Democrats learn their lesson? Probably not. They'll blame Republicans. Yeah, they'll blame Republicans. Everything the Democrats do is always the Republicans' fault 3 years later. It's like Obamacare. It's catastrophe. Didn't get to keep your doctor, didn't get to keep your policy, didn't decrease the costs, killed private insurance, drove people off the insurance rolls, passing out insurance subsidies to millionaires. Yeah, right. That is a great system. And now they want to extend it by giving another $500 billion to the insurance companies, not to the American people to buy insurance in a competitive market. Oh, no, God forbid. They want the money to go directly to the insurance companies. Because they think they're in charge of that too, just like they're in charge of everything you earn. Where is health care insurance in the Constitution? I'm sorry, you want to show that to me? How come nobody asks any of the Democrats? Where is this in the Constitution? Where are you authorized to write this kind of law? Because they're not. And the Supreme Court admitted it. What they wrote in the law was a penalty that they said was unconstitutional. And then the Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Roberts, used judicial legislation to rewrite Obamacare from the penalty it was written as to a tax that it was not. And the penalty was unconstitutional. But somehow, a tax that didn't exist in the law made the whole thing constitutional. He didn't tell them they had to send the legislation back, rewritten as a tax. He rewrote it for them. Oh, okay. Show me tax imposed in the law. Doesn't exist. Show me liability for tax. Doesn't exist. Well, if there's no tax imposed and no liability for tax, what was the basis for the tax? Impost, duty, or excise? You're taxing a refusal to act, not in participating in a taxable activity or transaction. You're taxing a refusal to act. That's not constitutional either, but Justice Roberts said, oh yeah, it's perfectly okay as a tax. Judicial legislation is destroying this country. The judges need to be held accountable. Okay, I hear the break coming up. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. I'll be back next week with more on more.